In the heart of a barely recognizable frozen city, where every infrastructure has completely shut down and all modes of transportation are at a standstill, an urgent report emerges. The Earth has rapidly entered a new ice age. The brave correspondent braced against the cold, his microphone freezing over with each passing second, as he informed the public that global temperatures would continue to drop without any signs of stopping. Despite this grim news, he urged the public not to lose hope. Balling his fist, he projected confidence that the government had not forgotten about its citizens in these tough times. He stressed that as long as they stood together, the people of this strong nation would overcome this daunting crisis. Just as he was about to continue with more unity propaganda to calm the masses, a fully frozen airplane crash-landed in the middle of the city, plowing through the reporter and his entire crew. A man watched this final shot of the last news broadcast covered by the remaining TV station in the country, viewing it on a miserably frozen screen. The room of our protagonist, Hanfun, painted a picture of someone who tried to fight but finally gave up. He did not bother cleaning up the mess of what little supplies he had left. The area around his entrance was cluttered with boxes of useless stuff and dwindling provisions. Outside, someone was knocking hard and calling his name in a panic. Finally hearing the incessant calling, Hanfun stood up from his filthy, frozen apartment. He took a steel bat modified with some nails, traces of blood still visible on its surface. He slowly and carefully peeked through the peephole to see who was on the other side. What he saw shocked and excited him a little. It was a woman he was very familiar with from before the Ice Age even began. She too was wearing her thickest winter clothing, but standing outside exposed to the elements had made her face red and her body shiver uncontrollably. Hanfun opened the door, slightly flushed. The woman's name was Hyona, and he had no idea what she was doing outside his door. Still holding the bat, he urged her to come inside where it was warmer and safer, as the outside world had become a dangerous, lawless land. Hyona swung the door open wider and entered Hanfun's relatively safer room. The next thing he knew, she was grabbing him by the collar and pressing her lips onto his. Her little bonnet even fell with how fast she moved. Hanfun was surprised, but he did not pull back, and his cheeks grew even redder. This deep and passionate kiss went on for what felt like an eternity. When they finally separated, both Hanfun and Hyona were breathing heavily, their tongues still out, spit still dribbling. Realizing what had just happened, Hanfun pulled back and asked what had gotten into her to make her grab him and kiss him the second he opened the door. Still trying to catch her breath, she confessed that she had realized Hanfun was the man she truly loved all this time. Tears started forming in the corners of her expressive eyes as she told him he was the one she was supposed to be with all along. It takes a crisis to see someone's true colors, to see who really cares for you. She took Hanfun's hands and placed them against her chest to feel how fast her heart was beating. She promised she would do anything just to be together. Hearing the word anything wiped out any semblance of rationality in Hanfun's brain. To seal the deal, Hyona started pressing her thighs against Hanfun's body, grinding and pulling him closer. He did not stand a chance at all. Hanfun looked Hyona directly in her eyes as she tenderly caressed his cheeks. He confessed that her words meant the world to him, but the door frame was not the right place for them to continue this. Hyona gently shushed him, telling him not to say another word. All she wanted right now was for Hanfun to close his eyes and feel the moment. Against his logical mind, Hanfun did what she asked. Now that his eyes were closed, he asked what was supposed to happen next. That's when another guy burst in, gripping the door ominously. This mystery man swung the frozen door wide open, locked onto Hanfun's head, and smashed a blunt weapon with lethal intent. Poor Hanfun did not see it coming. His skull was crushed while his eyes were closed. The cruel sneak attack splattered blood all over the apartment entrance. Hyona and the mystery man entered the apartment. She shivered and stuttered, seemingly shocked that her partner in crime would actually kill Hanfun. The man scoffed and told her to stop pretending to be innocent, as she knew this was the only way things could go. The world went to hell a long time ago, and one less mouth to feed wouldn't change anything. Enough dwelling on the brutal attack, it was time to see what Hanfun had been hoarding. If they played their cards right, they might have enough supplies to survive until rescue came. The messed up part was that Hanfun did not die immediately. He lay on the freezing cold ground, trembling in agony, while all the blood from his head wound froze as soon as it spilled out. He was not really clear on what happened, but he could not move. Maybe it had finally come. Perhaps he was finally dying. He could finally know what it felt like to lose his life. The last thing he saw was the mystery man and that evil witch Hyona flirting a few meters away from his limp body. The man was touching her in ways Hanfun could only dream of, promising to reward her for her best actress performance that made the whole operation possible. As Hanfun's eyes closed for good, the hatred he felt for that cold-hearted woman was unbearably heavy. He swore that if there was a next life, he would never let himself be a lovesick puppy again. Empty darkness he was plunged into, Hanfun started seeing little droplets of light. It began as a tiny speck that grew into something bigger and more substantial. As it got brighter, Hanfun started questioning what was happening. He subconsciously extended his arm, noticing his skin was translucent, like an entirely different entity. The warm light attracted him, especially after suffering through the endless cold of the real world. Could this be the path to heaven? But the golden light suddenly changed to red. Now, what kind of heaven had this crimson hue? After being baited by the golden light and trying to reach out for it, Hanfun, or at least an abstract construct of his body, felt his limbs being shredded like he was being put through a meat grinder. Nothing ever went well for this man. It did not take long for the crimson light to cover his entire body as he let out a miserable scream of agony. His translucent frame disintegrated piece by piece. The dark nothingness was filled with his scattered essence, and Hanfun was gone. Still feeling the pain of being ground and deconstructed atom by atom, he woke up in a cold sweat, screaming for his life. He looked around, and the sun shone bright through his balcony. His soft and comfortable bed was nice and clean. The air felt fresh as it lifted his curtains. Hanfun was far from the cruel world he had gotten used to. Hanfun could not get over the fact that the sun was shining again. He missed its warmth and light. He thought he would never feel this type of comfort and warmth ever again. Checking the date, it seemed to be the morning of June 28th. As far as he could remember, the Ice Age apocalypse would start on July 15th. He was supposed to die after being ambushed, but somehow he was transported back in time half a month before the end of civilization. Besides the memories he retained from the previous timeline, there was something different this time. Something strange was happening inside his body, and it seemed to be manifesting in his hands. Ever since he woke up, a red glow had wrapped around his right hand. He tried wiping it off and waving it away, but nothing made it disappear. It didn't hurt, it just felt warm. It didn't seem to do anything else besides glow, and he thought he was just imagining things at first. He noticed the red glow in his right hand had mysteriously turned to green. Then something happened that made him panic. The hand that was wrapped in the green glow started getting bigger, growing in length as if his bones, flesh, and skin were stretching out. Afraid and confused, Hanfun stormed into his room and slammed the balcony door shut as fast as he could. He managed to make it inside before anything more drastic happened. He was huffing and puffing for air, but the hand seemed to have turned back to normal. The green glow was still there, though, lingering and seemingly inexhaustible. Hanfun looked at it helplessly. After the lengthening incident outside, now it was shrinking very slowly. The green light seemed to be erratic, shrinking and growing unpredictably, unlike the stationary red one. But that was still a mystery too. Sitting down on his couch, Hanfun suddenly felt a pang of unbearable exhaustion. He hadn't done much aside from running back inside, but he felt drained. This might be connected to the green light. Frustrated, he started swinging his arms all over the place, trying to get a semblance of a clue as to what this really was. Then it hit him. Isn't this just like those manhwa stories he loves to read? He immediately sprinted to the kitchen and grabbed his sharpest knife. In those manhwas, the protagonist always starts their stories by being reborn. Just like them, maybe he would gain cheat-like powers. He wanted to test this out by grabbing the coolest thing he could imagine and posing with it. After a few minutes of waiting for something to happen, anything to change, Hanfun just scratched his head in shame as the sharp knife did not react with the light in his hand at all. He was so busy trying to find out if he had some fantastic cheat-like powers that he neglected his exhaustion and the rumbling of his stomach. He was just starving at this point. Unfortunately for him, the Hanfun of the past clueless about the coming apocalypse, was a lazy bastard who didn't have a single piece of edible food in his fridge. This was getting bad. He had never felt so hungry before. If he didn't eat something soon, he would most likely pass out. He turned his attention towards the living room, where a clear jar of soybean snacks was just sitting quietly. These roasted soybeans were just some leftover snacks he got before the apocalypse. It wasn't exactly a complete and filling meal, but it would have to do for now. It should tide the hunger before he hit up the supermarket later. He grabbed one of the roasted soybeans. Hanfun was too hungry to think of anything else, so he tossed the soybean right into his mouth. As soon as the bean hit his tongue, a smoky explosion occurred right in his face. Much to his surprise, he was now munching on a bean stalk. It looked as though the roasted soybean had sprouted inside his mouth. He could feel the roots on his tongue and the stalk itself extending outward. He pulled it out, and the plant left an earthy taste in his mouth. Moreover, he didn't feel tired anymore. It seemed like that explosion in his face erased the hungry sensation he was feeling. Looking down at his right hand, the green light had vanished too. Maybe all of this had something to do with what happened to the soybean. He plucked one of the pods from the stalk and examined it carefully. Opening the lush green pod, he confirmed that it was just an ordinary fresh bean sprout. Maybe this was the power he was daydreaming about. No matter what, this was undoubtedly an incredible discovery that should be studied more. Still, he couldn't really research anything while worrying about dying of hunger at any moment. Right now, he had a bigger task at hand, stocking up on supplies before the end of the world. Hanfun was in deep thought as he walked to his destination. When he touched the soybean snacks, they sprouted into a whole stalk. Looking at his right hand with more questions than answers, he wondered just what kind of power had been bestowed upon him. Continued his contemplative walk until he heard a familiar sweet voice calling his name. She flashed her wide smile, her makeup on point, hiding her rotten personality. She asked if Hanfun was out shopping too. Hanfun hadn't really had the chance to digest everything that had happened yet, but seeing Leona out in the wild started to bring back the bitterness he held on to until his final breath. Leona used to be the goddess of his dreams for 3 long years. He was a sap who did everything in his power to make her happy. He did all that knowing full well that he was nothing but just another fallback guy in the friend zone. He never would have thought that she would be the one to get him killed. Before he could go out of control, Hanfun pinched himself to stay grounded and calm. It took every bit of his willpower to do so. Thinking rationally, now was not the time to take his revenge. Not yet, at least. First, he needed to take care of the supply problem. Leona walked closer and waved her hand in front of his eyes while asking what he was spacing out for. Hanfun faked a smile as he apologized for being speechless and for how especially beautiful she looked today. She was just so radiant that he got a bit lost in the moment. Leona coyly laughed and asked when he got so smooth with his lines like that, with the most adorable pose in her arsenal. Leona invited Hanfun to go shopping together since they had run into each other anyway. He just walked on and apologized that they wouldn't be doing any shopping together today. Leona was stunned. While walking in the other direction, Hanfun couldn't help but praise the girl's technique, but he wouldn't fall for it. He wouldn't be used as a personal ATM again. So he went straight to the spot where he could get everything he needed, Waldemar Shopping Plaza. This Waldemar in the city is the most extensive and well-stocked supermarket in the eastern region. When the Ice Age hits, this place will be cleaned out overnight. Back in the previous timeline, nobody ever found out who did it and how. Hanfun had already started his shopping spree and filled up one cart with goods. He needed to stock up as much as possible before society crumbled under the sheer cold. He consulted some internet forums about some generic apocalypse survival guide, and it was surprisingly helpful. Scrolling through, he listed down the things he'd need: food, winter clothes, medicine, daily necessities, fuel, tools, transportation, and even weapons. His personal wallet's current balance was a measly $15,000, an equivalent to a little more than $2,000. How was he supposed to secure a safe and comfortable life in the icy apocalypse with only this much? At that moment, a message notification popped up on his phone. The message came from an organization called Money Jar Loans, congratulating him on his approved eligibility to take out a loan up to 168,000 yuan, or a little more than 23,000 US dollars. A light bulb went off in his mind. There was no need to panic about funds. How could he forget that the convenience of technology had brought him an infinite money glitch? There are dozens of money lending apps that require minimal documentation to get a loan approved. Out in the commercial district, some lady was angrily kicking an empty soda can on the curb. It turned out to be Hyona. She was seriously pissed off that Hanfun would just take off like that without letting her deplete his bank account like a worthless leech. She started insulting the guy in her mind for being a pathetic loser who doesn't even own a car. Hyona vowed never to be nice to that simp again. She turned around to see what was up. It looked like a brand new truck straight out of the dealership, still shiny and premium looking. Hanfun was lowering the windows from the driver's seat. He just pulled up to greet her as he happened to pass her by. Hanfun hopped out, and when asked if the car was his, he answered affirmatively, adding that he just got it earlier. He concocted a story about how his dad has been killing it in the United States business-wise, so he had some cash to blow. He even added that he just got out of the airport after dropping off his old man. She took a deep breath and put her game face on for Hanfun. She looked to the ground and started trembling lightly, knowing that Hanfun had taken his wealthy father to the airport today. She began apologizing for asking him to go shopping without knowing he'd have a busy schedule. Then the waterworks came down, summoning those tears at the perfect time while meekly telling Hanfun that he was so cold to her earlier she thought he was ditching a good friend. Hanfun smiled with satisfaction. He did not hesitate to hold her by the waist, pulling her closer. His other hand took hold of her chin, and they looked each other in the eye. Hyona was taken aback by the fact that one of her simps was so confidently forward. She brought out the big guns. Hyona admitted that Hanfun was pretty special in her life too. She even invited him to have lunch and watch a movie today so she could get to know him better. Just as she was about to ask for his answer, Hanfun was already gone like the wind. Hyona was speechless. Hanfun was already tinkering with the piles of boxes in the back of his truck. He was playfully complaining about how he still has to carry so many things and how busy his schedule is. Hyona tried her best to keep her sweet girl composure as she asked why he bought so much stuff. He replied that this much was nothing special, he just grabbed some things he liked. Hanfun lied through his teeth, enthusiastically telling her that he got a present for her too. Not wanting to overplay her hand, Hyona waved goodbye as she walked in the direction of her home. She smiled and said that she was looking forward to that gift. As soon as she turned her back towards Hanfun, her supposed biggest simp, a sly smile appeared on her lips, and Hanfun was just having fun messing with the witch. Knowing this woman, he knew that he couldn't let her find out about his little stockpile of supplies. All this stuff will be his ticket to surviving the apocalypse, after all. Hyona will just have to wait for her turn. Once the world ends, Hanfun will make sure that she gets what's coming to her, as will that mystery guy who bashed him on the head. Hanfun was actually beginning to look forward to what's coming. July 15th will be D-Day, the beginning of the end. First comes the heavy snow, then the temperature will drastically plummet to -20 degrees Celsius at an alarming rate over the next month. After that, temperatures will continue to gradually drop day by day, reaching lows of up to -70 degrees Celsius. At that point, the world would be encased in ice and snow completely, making it almost impossible to go outside. The first thing that Hanfun secured was his bountiful food supplies. Aside from the sheer volume of stock, he also needed everything packed and sealed securely. He couldn't let the neighbors sense that something was going on. This was tiring work. Some of the sensitive supplies had to be moved at night when no one was around. Once the apocalyptic ice age starts, the power grid will be extremely unstable. That's where his newest purchase shines, a heavy-duty generator, plus enough fuel to keep it running for a whole year at the very least. With power secured, he now had to consider the fatal consequence of the building's heating system stopping. He had to call in some specialized contractors to modify his home for independent heating. Hanfun also ordered some reinforced doors and windows while he was at it. He needed a dedicated room to store all the supplies that he had hoarded, so he used an empty bedroom for all the essentials. By the time he finished preparing everything listed in his little notebook of survival, it was already July 14th, just one more day before the temperature plummets and everything descends into chaos. Next up on his list was the main event that he's been postponing out of uncertainty all this time. it was time to buckle down and actually study his mysterious ability. Hanfun made a home-cooked meal for dinner while pondering his survival in the incoming Ice Age apocalypse. When things get hard, relying solely on the supplies he has accumulated won't be enough. His power to manipulate plants in some mystical way might be his only hope for a sustainable future. The meal he cooked featured soybeans as its main ingredient, the same beans he conjured from a single roasted snack using his ability. He racked his brain and tried so many gestures and possible triggers, but the lights hadn't come out yet. The activation is so random that finding the right trigger is nearly impossible for now. It is time for a risky taste test. He needs to make sure the food conjured by his abilities is edible. Hanfun got through half the plate of his beans with no apparent problems at all. Even the soy milk passed the taste and safety test. At least this proved that he has the ability to theoretically spawn food. The next step is the harder and more trial and error based one. He needs to figure out how to actually use the red and green lights and make them appear according to his will. So far, he has only tried it on soybeans, but what would happen if he could use it on other things? Opening his newly stocked fridge, Hanfun steeled his resolve to experiment and see if his ability would work with other plants too. The testing period stretched from midday until the sun was about to set. Hanfun did not know that as he passed out in the middle of experimentation. Slowly getting up from the floor, he could not be bothered by the absolute mess in his kitchen as the pain in his head was hellish. It felt like something was pounding from inside his skull. He needs to remember this feeling in the future. This power of his takes a severe toll on both the mind and body and can't be used without limits unless he wants to pass out and wake up with a migraine every day. After getting up, he immediately grabbed a spoonful of beans to refuel. He might have pushed himself to the limit today, but at least he learned something vital about this mysterious ability of his. A few hours ago, before he blacked out, he had neatly arranged a diverse selection of produce on the kitchen floor. Some root crops like potatoes didn't react to his green light at all, for some unknown reason. However, some of the crops grew from seeds into full-blown plants, like soybean stalks. Wheat was one of those that grew, while some neither stayed the same nor grew into full-blown crops but instead exploded in his hand. After those explosions, the plants would turn into a substance that looked like coal but was very light. This development was certainly unexpected, but thankfully, he could find some decent use for these inedible black substances. They can be used to heat the space like coal when put together in a container and lit up. Coming from a future where heat was a luxury, Hanfun would gladly take these little balls of warmth. No more worrying about staying warm in the future. After many more tries and failures, he kept throwing those black balls into a bucket one by one. When he got to some seeds he bought, he chose to take a more meditative stance, forcing himself to focus on controlling his breathing. After a few minutes of intense concentration that left him sweating bullets, he finally got the most significant success in this experiment. A gigantic broccoli appeared in his grasp. However, his eyes gave out, and his consciousness went dark. He remarked that the success rate of this method was still too random before his body hit the floor. Now awake and full of beans, he played around with the broccoli, thinking long and hard but still failing to find any patterns to this ability. Who would have thought that the key to activating this bizarre skill lies in his consciousness? All he has to do is enter a meditative trance. His method involves imagining himself out in nature, in his bare form, free from the constraints of human civilization. Sunlight kisses his skin as all life around him harmonizes. Once he enters that state of mind, he slowly opens his eyes, and the familiar green glow appears once again. This ability of his is directly connected to his consciousness. Working from that concept, he could freely call on the green light. The target of the second experiment would be all kinds of meats. So he slowly brought his right hand, wrapped in the green light, toward a juicy slab of meat. He already half expected it, but it's still disappointing that there were no reactions at all. Hanfun grabbed the meat and squeezed hard while praying that his right hand would work its magic. After a few minutes, he had to accept that nothing would happen. You could see the defeat and dejection in his tired eyes. That's when he thought of the sensation he felt while meditating in a trance. He could sense two distinct colors, the red and green lights. Throughout the experiment, he hasn't tried using the red one yet. Grasping the primary trigger function of his ability, he only has to concentrate on bringing that red light out of his consciousness. While still holding the meat, he closed his eyes and tried to reach for the other ability lying dormant inside his system. After a little while, a spark of red light finally appeared on his right hand. With that initial spark, the glow swiftly wrapped around his hand and surprisingly around the piece of meat too. It looked like it was creating some sort of bubbling reaction on the meat's surface. Hanfun opened his eyes to a putrid pile of hardened dark red sludge. He immediately threw that vile thing on the ground out of sheer disgust. Realizing that this disfigured sludge might provide some valuable insights, Hanfun crouched on the ground to observe it. He poked the thing, and it was a little squishy. It might look revolting, but the texture and overall feel point towards the possibility that the meat got cooked or something. Was this really all the red light could do? Heat things up? Hanfun refuses to believe that's all there is to it. Upon using his consciousness to trigger his abilities a fair bit, he could understand his capabilities on a deeper level. If he were to describe the red light sensation, it would be like a disintegration process. He grabbed a bunch of soybeans from his bean pile and gripped them hard in his right hand. In his left hand was the red light and the cooked-up meat. If the green light represents the evolution of matter, then the red light is the opposite, which would be disintegration. Since he's already testing out some confusing concepts, what would happen if he combined the green light grasping beans and the red light grasping meat? The result was an even bigger reaction than he was expecting. The meat had been supersized, but where did the soybeans in his right hand go? Could it be that the two subjects merged together, producing this giant slab? Hanfun meticulously inspected the big meat. It looks, feels, and smells exactly like real meat, but even fresher somehow. Gaining some confidence that he's getting a lot better at this superpower thing, he decided to go for some more experiments. After a few hours, he was back to square one once again. His kitchen floor was filled with charred remains of meat and crops. Frustrated, he threw a tantrum as everything he tried failed miserably. Getting all that exasperation out of his system, Hanfun sat up and took a deep breath. He'll just pause the experiments for now. He can always take his time to figure out its deeper intricacies later anyway. Today was still productive. Hanfun can already see the future. If he can successfully master this mysterious power, there's no doubt about it, with infinite resources, he would be the man standing at the pinnacle of this post-apocalyptic world. Speaking of power, he might have forgotten one of the most important aspects of survival. Food alone is not going to cut it in the coming days. He has to hurry and find himself a weapon before the temperature takes a nosedive. Looking out the window, it seems like the initial stages of the apocalypse have already started. Heading outside, Hanfun fears that the temperatures will drop to 45 below within the week. He needs a gun and fast, but buying a gun in this country is illegal, and he doesn't exactly have any connections to the criminal world. That's when he overheard a scandalous man yelling and boasting that he's a construction guy with millions riding on every project. The dude was bragging to a passerby that he knows the infamous Lao Wang from the Xiong Lida group. They're so close, they're practically brothers. Hanfun thinks he's seen this thug before, blinged out with jewelry of questionable authenticity, and over-the-top streetwear. A guy who offers everyone cigarettes for some reason. Around this area, people refer to this bleached-haired, cigarette-loving thug as Homeless Joe. Homeless Joe's real name is Lu, but he likes to be called Brother Lee. He lives in Hanfun's neighborhood and is reputed to be in charge of contracting projects, knowing everything and everyone around the area. If you offer him cigarettes, he won't accept any other brands, as he only smokes Huazi. Other brands make him cough. He's always helping his big brother with projects and looks forward to going to the sauna. In reality, this bum doesn't have a proper job, but he always acts so busy. You often see him walking around while on a call, shouting about deals worth 20 million or 10 million, but Hanfun can see that maybe Homeless Joe has the necessary connections to get what he so badly needs. So, he approached the thug, referring to him as Brother Lee and saying that it's been a long time since they have seen each other. Brother Lee, annoyed, asked if they knew each other as he walked closer. Being younger than Lee, Hanfun introduced himself as Xian, kind of like saying little bro, and swore that they'd met a while ago, so he must have forgotten. The thug complained that he's been swamped with work lately, so he can't be blamed for his bad memory. He surveyed the area, looking from left to right, to make sure that no one could hear what he was about to say. Then he came up to Brother Lee and directly asked for the weapon he needed to defend himself in the coming days. Lee jumped in fright and asked what he would need a gun for. Lee started speaking seriously, wanting to clear something up before they got any further. He insisted that his organization does not engage in any illegal activities and that guns are serious business. He hinted that he had the connections for it but was not one to mix ordinary people up with something dangerous. Hanfun pushed the thug's questionable Louis Vuitton bag out of his face and insisted that Brother Lee got it all twisted. He was just inquiring about some firearms for self-defense as he had been involved in some nasty personal grudge. So, Hanfun started lying his ass off with a story that he was making up as he spoke. According to him, one day while riding his bike to work like usual, he ran into an old man who was just spitting everywhere on the bike line. It was so gross, and to make matters worse, the wind carried one of those disgusting globs of spit right into Hanfun's face when he was just minding his own business. Angered by the revolting old man, Hanfun threw his bike to the side and confronted him. What did the bastard do? He decided to spit on him again while he was airing out his grievance. Hanfun could not take it anymore and brought down some street justice on the disgusting old man. He gave the guy a good old beating in the middle of the road with everyone watching on the sidelines. As the old man left with his clothes tattered and his face messed up, he swore that he would get back at Hanfun for this humiliation. The very next day, that old man was patched up and waiting for Hanfun on the usual bike route. This time, he had some goons with him. They beat Hanfun up quite badly and threatened to do it again if they ever saw him anywhere. His clothes were a mess, his face was bruised, and his body was wounded. He had never been so humiliated in his life. That's why he wanted a weapon for self-defense. Brother Lee was fuming in anger as he imagined the nasty old jerk spitting on the road and hitting Hanfun. Such uncivilized behavior should not be tolerated. That's not really the point of Hanfun's story, but at least he was getting somewhere. Brother Lee tapped his shoulders and assured him that this vendetta would be taken care of. He would just make a call to his big brother right now, and they would fetch that gun. Hanfun was starting to doubt if he had made the right decision in approaching this guy with all that tough talk. Brother Lee invited him to go to the station and hop on the bus with him, his excuse being that his Panamera was being serviced in the shop, so he couldn't drive to the headquarters. Hanfun assured him that transportation wouldn't be a problem. He had his car parked right to the side. On the drive over to his big brother, Lee could not stop going on and on about how Hanfun was living the good life and asked how much this new ride cost. It was about 700,000 of borrowed money. As he casually gave directions to turn left at the next intersection to reach the alleged office, Brother Lee kept on snapping pics of himself sitting in the new leather seats. His social media handle was "Handsome Spicy Guy," and tonight's post was a picture of his dumbass face with a caption complaining about how his SUV's seat was still too hard to sit in on account of it being new. They pulled up to one of the seedier parts of the city. Some tough-looking guys were camped outside, complaining about the messed-up weather. Seeing some crisp-looking wheels pull up, everyone turned to see who was about to exit that car. Seeing that it was Lee, they flocked towards him to ask what was up. Brother Lee just told them that he had some stuff to handle with Boss Lou. The other thugs assumed that the new Tiger SUV belonged to Lee and started hassling him about the price tag. Lee did not deny it at all. He even proudly boasted that he had spent 700 grand for the car. Hanfun was not upset, though. Bragging that you own the car so confidently while the actual owner is standing nearby is kind of a shameless, but impressive move. The one known as Boss Lou, a hardcore gangster-looking man, came out, upset that Big Mouth Lee would disturb him so late in the evening. Brother Lee visibly turned a lot more reserved in front of the boss, even offering his cigarettes politely, though he's a busy man. Brother Lee introduced their little brother Hanfun as a buyer of something special, a gun. Boss Lou wanted to confirm if he had heard that correctly. Then the big guy cracked a smile. He was quite disappointed that Hanfun only needed a lousy gun when he was expecting something more interesting. That he gestured towards one of his henchmen, Changshi. The henchman already knew what to do and rummaged through his jacket pocket. He tossed a pistol on the table, and Boss Lou quoted a price, 6,000 for the handgun, easy to conceal and reliable. Hanfun humbly rejected it, thinking more along the lines of something a little longer and bigger. Boss Lu's expression turned grave as he stared at Hanfun intently. The big guy started yelling about how unrealistic it was to demand a freaking sniper rifle like it was nothing. He was running a discreet business here, not some goddamn shopping mall where you get to pick and choose what kind of illegal product you get. Boss Lu's final offer was the pistol on the table, take it or leave it. Brother Lee had to run some interference to try to calm the boss down. His idea of convincing the big guy to listen was to invent a backstory for Hanfun on his own, a made-up story that allegedly happened 5 years ago involving Hanfun's non-existent wife. He kept repeating how disgusting those who had wronged Hanfun were. Apparently, Hanfun had 3 kids with a non-existent wife, but it turned out that none of them were his. Hanfun just stood there and went along with all the lies. Boss Lu gave his personal guarantee that Hanfun would get his sniper rifle as soon as possible. He promised that he would personally make it happen, but it might take a few days. Once again, the henchman Xiangzi would be arranging everything. Boss Lu wanted something semi-automatic with loads of ammo too, so Hanfun could have what he needed. It's unexpected, but Brother Lee definitely came in clutch. The big guy also handed Hanfun the handgun. He wanted to give it for free, a gift from one man to another. Hanfun was speechless. Before leaving, Hanfun wanted to return the favor a little bit. He mentioned that a friend working in the government had informed him that due to the unusual weather, purchase limits for supplies would soon be enforced, so it would be wise to stock up beforehand. Seeing the serious look in the young man's eyes, as if he genuinely knew what he was talking about, Boss Lu couldn't help but take the tip seriously. He nodded in understanding and acknowledged the advice. With one firearm secured, Brother Lee and Hanfun exited the city's underbelly. On the way back, Lee couldn't stop bragging about how he handled business like a boss and how smoothly everything went. Now that his big brother, the big boss, was in a good mood, they could probably even ask for a cannon, and he'd agree. Hanfun wanted to thank the thug by buying him some cigarettes. Brother Lee tried to be humble, insisting he helped just to assist Hanfun, but he would gladly accept 7 or 8 cartons of his beloved Huazi cigarettes. He even promised to take Hanfun to a sauna once he got paid for his so-called project. Hanfun was already thinking about his next logical move. With supplies secured and a weapon obtained, he felt prepared for the early days of the apocalypse. At the very least, he could focus on fully understanding his abilities. Absorbed in his own thoughts, he didn't notice an icy patch on the ground and slipped. He fell badly, his leg taking the impact and possibly being severely damaged. Brother Lee didn't know what to do as he rushed to his side. Hanfun shakily took out his car keys, handed them to Brother Lee, and requested to be taken to the nearest hospital as soon as possible. Lee scratched the back of his head, admitting he didn't have a driver's license and insisting he couldn't drive without one. He offered his shoulder to lift Hanfun, but struggled hard to do so. In the nurse's office, someone named John was on the night shift. The snow was getting heavier, and the roads were starting to get buried. Head nurse John had just started her shift, but calls from the hall were already flooding in due to the short-staffed emergency section. Upon getting an X-ray at the hospital, it was confirmed that he had indeed broken his leg. The doctor explained that there was a stable fracture on his right tibia. It would be easy to set, but he'd need to stay for an hour of observation before going home with his medication. This accident couldn't have happened at a worse time, just before the apocalypse was about to go into full swing. Looking at his X-ray results, Hanfun regretted being so careless. Brother Lee stayed with him for most of the process but had to leave, as he had a few deals to handle. He was a real friend, though, leaving his number in case Hanfun needed anything else. Now alone in the hospital lobby, Hanfun sighed heavily, wondering how he could make such a stupid mistake at such a crucial time. The chaos around him was stressful. The hospital quickly overflowed with patients, victims of accidents caused by the sudden blizzard and rapidly plummeting temperatures. The goddess had just walked in front of him. Head nurse John had come to bolster the understaffed emergency room. The first bed she checked had a patient with heavy wound. Next on her rotation was bed 5, where a patient's wounds had just been cleaned. Thankfully, the vitals were stable. Bed 5 just needed another dose of glucose in 10 minutes. She advised the attending nurse that if the patient's heart rate dropped below 80, epinephrine must be administered immediately. Throughout her rounds, Hanfun couldn't take his eyes off her. She was amazing, being a head nurse at such a young age. She was kind and incredibly skilled, looking like a radiant being in the middle of a hopeless place. Moreover, she was incredibly beautiful. Working the hectic night shift, her smile never faltered. He was so enamored that his eyes accidentally traveled to some ungentlemanly areas. Hanfun immediately averted his gaze out of respect, but head nurse John was just way too unaware of her surroundings. Suddenly, the old man sitting beside him started calling the attention of the pretty head nurse. She wasn't required to tend to patients outside of her rounds, but she still took the call with a smile. Head nurse John politely apologized to the old man, asking if she could come back a bit later to help, as she still needed to provide urgent care to some patients due to the staff shortage. The old man complained that his back hurt too much and wanted the head nurse to take a look to see what was causing it. In reality, this bastard was just a dirty perv trying to film below her skirt. Not noticing what was really happening, John just smiled and apologized again, saying that for such back problems, they might need to schedule an X-ray to be sure. The old perv started getting pushy, urging her to take a quick look as he pointed to where it hurt. The bastard even got up from his seat to touch the angelic nurse inappropriately. Being the airhead she usually was, John just laughed, as she was naturally ticklish. For back problems, it's advisable to wait for the resident physician's exam. The perv started pushing it, his hand crawling even lower from her waist. A flying crutch forcefully smashed against the old perv, giving him real back pain and knocking the phone away from his hands. Ever the kind-hearted healthcare worker, John wanted to check if the old man was all right. Thankfully, Hanfun came to her rescue, humbly apologizing for his crutch flying to the side as this was his first time using one. He bent over and went straight for the old perv's phone while blatantly questioning if it was broken. Just as he was about to touch it, the perv started sweating nervously and screamed at him to stay away from the phone. Hanfun didn't listen. He walked to the side of the room, got his bandage all messed up, and wouldn't let this creep get away with doing something so disgusting. As soon as he opened the phone, his suspicions were confirmed. He looked at the creep directly in the eyes. There was no good reason why Hanfun shouldn't call security and have the bastard escorted to a jail cell where criminals love putting pervs in their place. Hanfun would be keeping the phone, and the next time he saw this old creep again, he threatened to ruin his miserable, revolting life. The first chance he got up from the hospital floor and bolted out of the door like his life depended on it. Meanwhile, head nurse John was just confused as to how someone complaining about severe back pain could run so fast. Hanfun was shocked to see the most comically naive person he had ever met. Hanfun handed her the phone with the video footage so she could decide whether to wipe it or call the cops on the owner. He also reminded her to be more careful so people like that perv wouldn't take advantage of her kindness. She smiled with the brightness of 1,000 stars and then asked if Hanfun's leg was supposed to be injured. Thankfully, head nurse John was an expert in mending these types of injuries and quickly set the cast back in place. She looked at him and asked if it still hurt. Hanfun thanked her for dealing with his broken leg, and now it didn't hurt at all. John returned the gratitude, promising to never let such bad guys get away with messing with her anymore. She promised to punch them really well from now on. Hanfun just wanted her to be more aware of her surroundings. Seeing as she was letting his broken leg and feet touch her front, it seemed like she hadn't learned anything at all. She was still as clueless and unaware as ever. While Hanfun's head was in the clouds, another nurse called for John as her help was needed on the emergency beds. Before going back to her rounds, the angelic head nurse reminded him not to forget to come back in a week to get his leg checked again. Hanfun promised that he would. He took the crutch that he had smashed against the old perv and limped his way out of the hospital. Hanfun accepted the fact that he might never see her again. The next day came, and the blizzard had not stopped. On the morning news, emergency weather reports kept coming in about how, within the next 24 hours, all regions of the country would experience heavy snowfall and a sharp drop in temperatures. Bizarre reports from overseas correspondents showed that temperatures were plummeting in every corner of the world. Dubai, Egypt, the Amazon basin. Every network echoed the experts' assurances that this severe cold snap wouldn't last too long. Warm, cozy, and sipping wine inside his decked-out home, Hanfun clicked his tongue. The government and media just kept lying through their teeth, feeding the public nonsense to maintain order. If he hadn't died and come back to life already, he might even believe them. But this time was different. he was well prepared for everything that was about to come. Supplies were fully stocked, the house was reinforced, and the heating system was working flawlessly. He was so well prepared that there was nothing to worry about for the immediate future. His phone started buzzing incessantly with messages from the Happy Housing Complex residents group chat, discussing the weird weather and how the snow was already making the roads unusable. Everyone was clearly clueless about what was happening, except for the member nicknamed Mysterious Person. Whoever this was demanded everyone's attention, informing them that the snowstorm wasn't caused by normal weather patterns but by something within the earth itself. The mysterious person proclaimed that everyone should heed his words as the Ice Age apocalypse was about to begin. Who the hell was this mysterious person, and how did they know anything about the apocalypse? Currently the residences of the building are complaining about the snow. They're worried that the supermarket will be emptied and they won't have any supplies for this weather. A virtual cat army angrily asked for the project manager. They want him to give them an explanation. A cute white cat apologies to them, stating there isn't much they can do, since they can't handle such a small matter. The cats want a refund for the property management fees. However, our protagonist is aware that this storm isn't something human beings can deal with. Suddenly someone tells the cats to stop fighting. It is Jiang Shuio. He commented that the snowstorm is so heavy that even if they clear it up, it will cover the area again in only a few hours, but if everyone had helped they would have managed to leave a long time ago. Unfortunately, these cats lack a spine and are scared to do what is needed. The property management are also humans, so they can't stand against a natural disaster, but obviously, these people are only taking their anger out on them. The cats gets wild up after getting called out. They inquire if he's a part of the property manager, why is he defended them and has the audacity to lecture them. The guy explains he's not speaking on behalf of the property management, but logically, the cats begin to think for a moment. He happily explains it's useless to blame the property management as that won't resolve their problem. A cat asks what does he propose they do. He explains that a car can't drive on this road. Even if a car could drive, there's no guarantee that the road outside are clear. He suggests that they walk over there. If they accept, he'll help the property management clear the footpath. Our protagonist makes a serious face, having some recollection of this owner Jiang. He was supposedly a very lively person. A cat leaves commented if this matter is really that complicated. Another cat yawns, saying those who want to leave should clear the road and those who don't should shut up. Fighting for half a day just to clear some snow is really annoying. A black cat comes forward saying he will help to clear the road. He needs to help his brother with a business worth millions. The cat's manner of speaking is similar to someone the protagonist knows. The crowd begins to work together. A cheerful cat with a powerful shiny aura that seems to blind the other cats says she will go too, despite being weak. Now we have this cat that gives me the creeps, saying that she's had the flu for a few days, but will definitely help. The protagonist smiles, thinking she'll go ahead and freeze, but two loyal simps appear to save the day. Sorry, I'm mistaken. An army of simps come to her aid. He leaves the virtual world and thinks regarding putting on an act. That devil is really good at it. At that moment she inquires what he's been busy with and she's still waiting. She tells him when he gets to the supermarket, buy food for her, then sends him a picture of her looking fine as hell. He thinks even though the weather is so bad, she's wearing so little to try and seduce him. She's really putting in the work. He ponders how he should reply. At that moment she hits her phone with her foot. Today is the third day since it started snowing. The temperature is now -20 degrees. In the early stages of the apocalypse, they still had heating systems. They still had internet and everyone was going on with their daily lives as usual. As for him, he can only scroll through videos to pass the time. It's only the second day on, he's already bored. It seems the biggest problem of the apocalypse is to beat loneliness. His leg isn't doing too well either. It needs at least a month to recover. He decided to continue scrolling, then saw a video about an injured man whose body was regenerating, often being sewed up. Suddenly he has an idea. He takes his hand wrapped in green aura and places it on his foot. After some time nothing happens. He slowly started falling asleep, dreaming about an army of sheep taking a walk.